What does it take to be the greatest, the highest chess rating ever achieved, the longest unbeaten streak in the history of chess? The Magnus Touch. Get a free lesson from world champion Magnus Carlsen with Chessable's interactive move trainer at chessable.com/Magnus.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the after show for the FIDE Online Steinitz Memorial, which began today on Chess24. We had an action-packed day, pretty fun format with these Blitz games, and we will go through some of these games. It's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to on the after show, mainly because this is a Blitz format, and so for Blitz, I think it makes less sense to look at the entire games, but rather look at the sort of interesting snippets, the fun things that happen, the blunders that happen, the openings that are played, the strategy that different players have, and so on, rather than, try to overanalyze every game. Obviously, there are mistakes in these games because they are played with very, very little time. But we got some really fun positions. It got started in a really fun way. We're going to go through that in the first game between Magnus Carlsen with white against Peter Svidler. But I guess first, let's just go through the standings. In the women's section, Alexandra Kostyniuk is leading with 5.5 out of 6. A very strong day for her. She won 5 games and drew 1, no losses. And after that, it's a pretty tight pack of players at 4 and 3.5. Mostly because there is one player, Daisy Corey of Peru, who had a rough day at the office with no points at all, and so that means the middle of the field is a lot more tight. We'll go through a couple of the moments from that, and then in the open section, Magnus Carlsen in the sole lead, even though he did lose one game, which we'll go through, and there were a couple of scary moments for the world champion today. But he did manage to pull through and be in the lead after the first of 3 days. So they're going to play. It's a double round robin. So they're going to play. They played 6 games today. So these numbers that you see are out of 6, and they are going to keep playing. They're going to keep playing for two more days, 6 games until they get 18 games. So. So what do we have today? So, I wanted to start by showing you here real quick that there was a discussion prior to the game starting. Magnus Carlsen tweeted, "My boy Paul Borda, who is Peter Svidler, better be ready for c3, e5, c4." Knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4, h4 in the first round. And so clearly that was a sort of a Babe Ruth moment, where you point to the sky and you say, that's where I'm going to hit the ball. And sure enough, Magnus went for it in the first game, and we're going to go through that right now. And this is sort of a throwback to the fact that they had this in their first of all, Magnus played this exact position in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational. He played it with black against Ding Liren. And so let me switch my screen here so you can see. So essentially what he does here is that he wastes a tempo with white, and he announced it, so Peter could not have been too surprised. But they also played in a Banter Blitz game where Magnus also played this. And so here, obviously we could have the same position with colors reversed because white spent 2 tempi bringing his pawn to c4. So it's essentially like being black. And now he plays h4, which is what he had played against Ding Liren. And so Magnus went for it. Cannot say that it worked out especially well in this game against Peter here today. He did manage to survive, but it was not. This g4, of course, is sort of over ambitious. Although it is partly the idea of h4 is to be able to expand like this. Here, since black is able to get a very nice center, it's not clear that it's a great position for white. And And so, but I want to fast forward. Magnus did manage to get out of it with a not bad position. Maybe Peter could have been a little bit more ambitious in the opening here. White is okay here. But I want to get to a position where both sides. So this position should have been a draw. It was should have been a draw. It is an equal position. But in blitz, of course, anything can happen. And here, Magnus actually wins a pawn, and then suddenly gets himself in a mating net here. And so now rook h1 is threatened. So he plays king f1. Rook takes h4. And here Magnus makes a blunder that could have cost him the game. He played rook takes a7. So white was a little bit better, and maybe much better at some point when just after he won the pawn. But here, this actually allows black to encircle the white king. And this is sort of a typical structure, but with very little time, Peter missed this. And then, so you're threatening rook h1 here, so that forces king e1, really the only move. And then you play rook d4. And this kind of motif is very common in rook and bishop against king. You know, when there's no pawns, sometimes you'll have like a king on g3, for example, when there's no pawn, and this is a typical motif. So of course these players are very familiar with this. And now black is just winning. But Peter missed a mate here, and so Magnus gets away with one, and has an endgame that really you would expect him to win, especially in blitz. But Peter manages to survive, even though here the move king b4 was a blunder. And Magnus very quickly, maybe almost, pre-move, didn't spend time looking here, and plays king f4 when knight c2 would have ended the game. So action-packed first game here for Magnus. I did want to show, so I wanted to show a position that happened in the women's event. This was the first win for Alexandra Kostyniuk, and she started very well and got this position. And this is just a sort of a really, really ugly looking position, and typical of Alexandra's style. She's a sharp attacking player. She spots tactics very quickly, and I think that ability to spot tactics very, very quickly is one of the key things in blitz. Blitz is a lot about pattern recognition. And also one of the key things that some of the really good blitz players do, like Hikaru Nakamura and Kostyniuk, is that they don't always play the best moves, but they don't really waste time making decisions that are not that important. And so they focus, and they don't blunder, right? So if you look at Alexandra's games, which you can do very well, of course, on our broadcast page. You have more tools available if you are a premium member. So if you are not a premium member, I would urge you to consider it. You can see the benefits at chess24.com/premium. But if you look at her games, you can see that she's not always winning from the opening, or the opening is nothing special, but she doesn't make mistakes. And then when her opponents do make a mistake, she's really good at capitalizing on this. So in this game, she finishes off her opponent in style here with f5, which cements the position on the bishop on e7 and stops black from ever getting out of the pin. So this is just a disaster for black. And the game ended with a very nice exchange sacrifice. The rook is attacked. And so a very nice win here. She's threatening all sorts of stuff, but the rook is trapped. So now I wanted to show you. So after the draw against Peter Svidler, Magnus was facing with black Quang Liem. They had an interesting opening in this game. It was in this in the bishop f4 line. Actually, not the bishop f4. It was in a sort of an anti-Catalan, and they got to this position, which looks to most people, this might look like the position after queen c2, queen takes. And I'll say hello to people in the chat. Hello, Red Ribbon. Hi, Fish45. Feel free to ask me questions. I am following the Chess24 chat. I can't follow all the other chats because it's just I'm producing and I'm doing the content as well. So I apologize if I miss your questions, but come over to the Chess24 chat. You don't have to be a premium member to ask me questions, and I'll try to make sure to answer them. So in this position, they get an endgame like this. And even though this is, so we have 5 pawns for black, 5 pawns for white, all on the same side. And okay, of course, the white bishop doesn't seem very good because all the pawns are on its color. But to some people, this might seem like it should be an easy draw for white. You know, you're not far from playing f3. And if the pawn was, instead of h4, if that pawn was on h2, took it back, you could play probably h3, g4. This position would be quite okay for white. But as it is, it's actually quite tricky to hold. And we'll see, Magnus does a very nice demonstration. He plays g5. And now the threat is to play g4, fixing all these pawns on the dark squares. And then black sort of has a free hand. The knight's going to come to e4, beautiful square. Someone says, salut de Terrebonne, bonjour. I think this is someone with the last name Lamoureux. If I recognize the picture, I'm looking from very, very, this is a very small picture, but an old acquaintance from Quebec where I grew up. So here, yeah, this position, sort of the world champion makes it look like it was very, very difficult for white to hold. And of course, you know, if you were playing with you know, an hour on the clock as white, I would expect white to hold this position. But in this time control, it was not easy. And it's in this moment, I think specifically, that king f2. Yeah, Fish45 is asking if the pawn was on h2, would you push it to h3 and support g4? Yeah, if the pawn was on h2, the idea would probably be to play h3, g4 if possible, to put these pawns on the light squares, and then be able to play maybe f3, stopping the knight from getting that outpost on e4. Yeah, so here, actually, this is a mistake. Bishop g3 allowed king g5, and now the pawn on g4 is in trouble. And after the pawn on g4 falls, this is a really difficult, well, it's not just difficult, it's just losing endgame. The bishop is actually terrible. This bishop on f2 is still terrible. So the world champion won that game and seemed to be on his way to possibly having quite a good day. Then I wanted to show you this game between David Anton Guijaro and Alex Grishchuk. Grishchuk had sort of an up and down day. He's coming off of a very nice victory in a charity chess tournament that just happened. He beat Vladimir Kramnik yesterday, so he's had a busy number of days here, and so maybe he's a little bit tired, but he's obviously extremely strong. And this game was sort of a beautiful King's Indian for black, which for a blitz game was really nice. These plans with g4 are sort of typical of these King's Indian positions where white doesn't castle. But in this game, things go wrong for white, and black gets sort of the ideal setup here with b5, rook c8. And already black is very comfortable, I think. And here h5 was a very nice move that provokes white to play g5. If you don't play g5 as white, then black will have a really nice square on h6 and potentially threaten to take that knight and play knight b3. You don't have to necessarily do that, but it is going to be in the air. So he decides to play g5, but after knight h7, queen d8, the position basically is starting to fall apart for white. f6. Now, if he takes on f6, bishop f6, and this pawn on h4 is going to fall. So he decides to give it this way, and this is just a nice King's Indian, sort of a positional King's Indian, because there's no crazy sacrifice here for black. He just managed to get his pieces on the ideal squares. Knight e2 was a nice little tactic to finish the game here. Up a pawn in a disaster position, and David Anton here hung the knight. He didn't have much time. So very nice game from Alexander Grishchuk here. Now, the next game I wanted to show you is a game that happened between Mamedyarov and Dubov. Dubov is known for his, among other things, he's a very, very dangerous player. He's a young player. He's worked on Magnus Carlsen's team, which is, of course, I'm sure is an amazing experience. I'm sure it's both hard work, but incredibly enriching as a young chess player to have the opportunity to work with a world champion like that and try to come up with very deep opening ideas, right? It's like when you work on a team of, whether it's Magnus or Fabiano or one of those guys, the depth of stuff you look at is extreme. And so that's That's something that benefits you as a player as well. So, but in this game, so this is a very, very common position, and the most common moves would be like bishop d6. There's all this theory with g4. But here Dubov plays a5. Pretty weird move. And so arguably, I think he's trying to make the case that, well, bishop d6 allows white to play g4 because the pawn on g7 is no longer defended. So here g4 doesn't work very well because we can just take it and rook g1, knight f6, right? And the pawn is defended. So arguably there's no point, well, or at least there's not much of a point to playing g4. And then I guess a5 is not an unreasonable sort of waiting move. And in some cases, he wants to play dc, bishop c4, b5. And the pawn on a5 is actually can be quite well placed to support b4, for example. So an interesting move. Someone's asking me a question in the chat here. Are openings really the best way to prepare for a blitz tournament? Or are you better off just practicing tactics? So yes, I do think that in general, practicing tactics is probably the best thing you can do before a blitz tournament. On the other hand, I think it's not so much about preparing openings, but you don't want to face self-doubt in the opening. So as the tournament goes, you want to be able to respond almost instantly to most of the openings that you face. Because if you're kind of stuck, if you get kind of stuck thinking in the opening, wasting 15 seconds here, 12 seconds there, 30 seconds, you end up lower on time, and that's really bad. You want to play fast. So Dubov playing a5, and he played it a few times today, is an example of that. I'm not sure that a5 is an incredible move. I'm not sure he prepared it deeply. He may have, he may not have. I just don't know. But having having sort of a set repertoire is definitely helpful. Otherwise, tactics obviously are extremely important in blitz. So, all right. So here, Mamedyarov responds with a waiting move of his own, which makes sense. He says, "You're wasting time playing a5. What is that move? I'm going to play h3." And now Dubov plays bishop e7, and white plays g4. So who did this whole charade with a5, h3, and then playing g4, bishop e7? Who did it help? I'm not entirely sure. But Dubov seemed to have a plan here. He plays this very forcing variation, and it doesn't seem crazy for black what he did. So we can't really take on c6 here because of rook c8. If you play bishop d7 here, that bishop is a monster, and you're probably just winning material. So this becomes a very well played game. Dubov lets that pawn at h7 go, but he's got an idea here. He plays knight f6, and suddenly he's getting pretty significant counterplay here. So yeah, this was actually a very interesting game. If white were to play bishop g2, then black would play bishop a6 and prevent the castling of the king. And even though white has won a pawn, it doesn't seem very clear. It seems like black is doing really well here. So he castles, and now black takes on e4, plays c5. So now this bishop on b7 is really good. He doesn't care about the number of pawns. He sacrificed 2 pawns, but now this king is really weak. And it's possible that there were other ways to play here. But the game ends in really nice fashion here with bishop f3. King h2 was a blunder here. I think I don't know that I would. Of course, I think black is winning this position all the time, but this did make things worse here. Queen e7. So he wants to play queen h4, queen h1. He plays queen g6 with the idea that if we play queen h4, he has check. But now black has a very nice move, rook f6, and it just wins on the spot. For example, if queen g5, we can still play rook h6 and sacrifice the queen and mate. So really nice game. Sort of Dubov has had a few of these games where he plays a novelty in the opening, and then somehow it just works out so beautifully for him. And he does make these sort of wild opening choices work really well sometimes. So someone is asking me a question here. why commentators spot all the tactics and players miss some of them? Well, the thing is, as a commentator, you have nerves is definitely one reason, but second is you don't have the pressure of making a decision with time. Like you can kind of look at it and be able to say, okay, I'm gonna think for 10 seconds here and then see it. And normally our commentators don't have the engines, but obviously if you have an engine running, then it's a whole other ball game. But in general, we shouldn't underestimate how good these players are. And if you do play some of them, sometimes you realize that as much as it seems they miss when you look at it from afar, they actually see a whole lot. But speaking of missing something, let's move on to this Korobov against Magnus game, where this was actually a game where you would have expected Magnus to be white. I'll just show the opening really quickly. It's this bishop f4 variation, which Magnus played both sides of, but especially white in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational that just wrapped up. So here he plays it with black. He plays b6, which I think he did have a game with b6 against Hikaru or against somebody. But in this game, he plays a variation that seems a little bit tame for black, because you're possibly just a little bit worse without too many prospects to get active play. But here I think his position is fairly normal. I think you can play knight c6 here, for example. But Magnus made a rare blunder, knight d7, which pretty much loses the game on the spot. Yes, someone in the chat is saying that bishop f3 rook h1 mate happened twice today. Yes, and Peter Svidler missed it, and Dubov did not miss it. Spotted it in very different style position with queens on the board and so on. But yeah, two very similar motifs. So do review your tactical motifs. So here, yeah, Magnus played knight d7, which walks into bishop c7, and the exchange falls, and with that, the game, especially because it's the exchange plus it's almost impossible to prevent further trades, especially of a pair of rooks, which really eases the task for white. So the rest of the game was very easy for Korobov, not really any problems. It took a lot of moves, but there was no real chance. Eventually, the more pieces get off the board, and that's always the concept, right? If you're up material, you can look at the position and, for example, say, in this position, how many, white has a bishop and a rook, let's say that's worth 8 points, and he has two bishops that's worth 6 points. So that's 8 versus 6, which is good. But if you trade a pair of bishops, then it becomes 5 versus 3, which is, in percentage terms, a bigger edge. So normally, when you're up material, that's one way to look at how trading pieces helps you. So, but yeah, basically in this position, he can't stop eventually trading more and more pieces or losing pawns. And so that was a rare big oversight for Magnus. But Magnus did bounce back in the next game. And that's why he ended up, with the lead in the tournament. In the game against David Anton, he had actually quite a clean game in the Rai Lopez here. And Magnus does tend to he's one of those guys that I think it makes him quite angry with himself when he loses, and so he tends to really bounce back. And I think Kasparov was also like this, so this was a nice game. He sort of black really got kind of crushed in this one. Yeah, Magnus probably was just really unhappy with the blunder, and David Anton was the recipient of that anger in this game. Next, I wanted to show you a snippet, a snippet between Jeffrey Xiong, who had a pretty good day until he lost the last game. But there was this kind of crazy situation here where he kind of got away with one here. Of course, white is up an exchange in this position, and so should either win or, should win really. However, Black gets a unique chance. This move G3 is imperceptibly a very big mistake. So I think you could play most rook moves, for example. I think maybe rook to E1 or, different moves would be, I believe, just, close to winning, or at least, white can try forever. But G3 actually throws away the win. And we have sort of a unique motif here where black plays knight D3. And so he's threatening knight F2. And then let's say the rook goes to A1, you just go knight F2, king G1, knight H3. And this is very cool, right? The knights just control all the squares. And so white has to go for a perpetual. Pretty amazing. And yeah, knights are definitely the trickier piece in blitz. But the amazing thing is that here, Quang, not Quang, sorry. This is Sang Bu plays rook E1, and which there's a problem with that move, which is that black can just take the rook. But I guess, of course, Jeffrey knew that he was about to do the perpetual, and he immediately plays knight F2 and just goes for the draw. So pretty wild that the rook was left hanging there for a moment. So next game, next game. Really, I just wanted to show quickly this very nice tactic here that happened at the end of the game between Jeffrey Xiong and Mamedyarov, where after knight takes G7, so black was already winning probably here. He's up a pawn, and his his position is otherwise fine, so he's up a pawn. But after knight takes G7, very, very nice finish here, bishop C2. So it's sort of overloading everything. The bishop has to defend the knight. The rooks are on the first rank, and white doesn't have room for his king. So after rook takes E2, black plays rook takes D4. Now you can't take because of rook A1 with mate. So you have to make a move like moving the rook or playing rook C1, and then the knight hangs. Rook C1, we just trade rooks, and then the knight hangs. So a very nice finish here, bishop C2. There really is no, and if the rook moves away, then we take that bishop, and the knight is still hanging. So we're winning a piece. So we're still, if the knight moves, then we'll just go back. We just have to make sure we go to the right square. So not E4 because of knight F6 check. So where do we go here? I guess bishop G6 works. And if we play rook E8, there's a king H7, knight F6, king G7, and the king walks away with impunity. So it just wins. So this was a very nice finish. So let's go back, just take a look at the standings one more time. Let's go back here. Yeah, so in the standings, we see Magnus Carlsen leading with 4 out of 6. And then we have a pack of 3 players, Xiang Bu, Daniel Dubov, and Mamedyarov with 3.5. And so it's very tight. It's still very much a wide open field. Sort of surprising that the leader is with 4 out of 6, just +2, right? 4 and 2, which is not too high of a score compared to the women, where in the women's standings, Kostyanyuk has 5.5, and then there's someone with 4. So a bit of a tighter pack in the open standings. And I wouldn't count out people like Korobov and Grishchuk, who had their moments today, but just ended up with a slightly suboptimal finish for both of them. And really, sort of everyone had their moments. Dubov had some great moments today, and he was looking quite good. Magnus, because of the blunder and some of the draws were not incredible, he probably feels like he can step it up a little bit, and I would expect him to step it up. He can tend to have really big scores in these blitz tournaments, so we'll see how he does tomorrow. Jeffrey Xiong was very much in there. I mean, it looked like he could have had maybe even more points. So yeah, and then in the women, well, Kostyanyuk, I wouldn't say her games were incredibly dominant, but her performance was, and that doesn't really surprise me. I've always thought she was really fast at spotting tactics. She's very strong either way, but in blitz especially, that speed of seeing things is really important. That's going to be it for today's after show. And I hope everybody will tune in tomorrow. By the way, I don't know if everybody filled out their fantasy chess, made their picks for the fantasy chess contest, but we're going to be running these pretty much on every large event that we cover. So make sure, you see them. They're usually on our news page. We tweet about them. We feature them in a few places, but do keep that in mind. You can win prizes, and in general, it just adds an element of fun to be rooting for certain results, certain people. And our odds are usually make it pretty tough to make good choices and bad choices. That's when the odds are well made, then really every option should be just about equivalent. So you can either pick your favorite players or try to figure it out. And either way, have fun with it. So all right, we'll be back tomorrow. It's a lot of fun to watch these high level blitz tournaments. We don't get that opportunity too much. Usually it's a different time control. And so I hope you enjoy, and I will see you guys again tomorrow. I will play the ad one last time, and yeah, see you guys.
What does it take to be the greatest, the highest chess rating ever achieved, the longest unbeaten streak in the history of chess? The Magnus Touch. Get a free lesson from world champion Magnus Carlsen with Chessable's interactive move trainer at chessable.com/Magnus.